We moved through the crowd to the other side of the room, where there stood a boisterous group of senior-looking gentlemen wolves wearing formal attire. They were talking and laughing just a little too loudly to be engaged in anything other than a subtle competition to not be amongst the losers in some top-doggy parlor game. As before, at the group's center, the young betrothed. The groom was indeed as handsome as the bride was pretty. His immaculate suit hung stylishly from his broad shoulders. He was smiling at their, no doubt, bawdy jokes. Yes, his mouth smiled, but a keen observer could see his eyes were definitely not joining in the fun. I was introduced to the groom's father, first and foremost. After all, it was his deep pockets that were ultimately keeping all these guests and many other unseen staff fed and watered for the duration. I took him in one glance and recognized his type, the kind of fellow I did not much care for or enjoy the company of. I suspected, looking at me, he had jumped to much the same conclusion. No doubt I was precisely the sort of silver-spoon dilettante that industrious titans of trade love to sneer at, while quietly longing to be. A second-generation squanderer, frivolously pawning off the family heirlooms to pursue a pointless life of self-indulgent pleasure. He, a self-made creature of business, regarded me with the envying disdain of one who suspects he missed the better party. He was only half right, as I did attempt to earn my keep occasionally. I was introduced to the groom, and to my mild astonishment, his nose seemed to loiter about my wrist with the air of one considering a rare vintage, lingering just long enough for a second, rather more deliberate inhale. His eyes flickered with a glimmer of surprise, then narrowed in an almost conspiratorial smile, eyebrow tilting in a rakish flourish, then all gone again in a flash. We stared at each other for a breath or two. It was clear he expected me to break the silence. Thankfully, I had a full arsenal of pleasantries at the ready, a linguistic crutch for precisely such moments. He had inherited his father's broad-shouldered frame, but unlike the old wolf, he seemed genuinely pleased to be introduced. I gathered my composure, determined not to dwell too heavily on the inevitable doom of tomorrow, and instead remarked, quite casually, that I'd heard of his fondness for the equestrian arts, a passion I myself had once entertained in my youth. This, it seemed, hit the mark splendidly, for he launched into an animated discourse on the subject, clearly relieved to discuss anything other than the well-worn topics of wedding nights, domestic arrangements, and the hopeful future pitter-patter of tiny paws. It was precisely at this moment that Seraphina left me to my fate. There were, after all, other guests in desperate need of mingling. We spoke for a short while until his father, unwilling to let his prize offspring be monopolized by one individual for too long, saw fit to interrupt. With the subtlety of a brass band, he shifted the conversation to a more self-flattering subject by asking what commercial pursuits I was engaged in. I saw his little game for what it was, a ploy to assert his standing as the undisputed alpha of the group. Unwilling to confirm any suspicions he may have entertained about my supposed feckless nature, I was happy to play a few cards I had up my sleeve. With a studied air of nonchalance, I mentioned the agricultural vagaries of my estate, and how, being mostly mountainous country, much of it was devoted to sheep, which, after the annual tithes were taken, left me, not surprisingly, with rather more wool than one could reasonably knit into socks. As luck would have it, I traded a good portion of it with Lycurgus, whose own fertile southern estate boasted a plethora of fruit orchards, apples being of particular interest to me. I was planning to take the opportunity of this trip to negotiate a few additional arrangements before my return. He always jokes that my wool keeps his peasants happy and contented during cold winter nights. His cider keeps mine happy and contented during hot summer days. In fact, there's many a herbivore back home who'll eat apples raw, considering the acidic monstrosities delicious and full of nature's goodness, apparently. Each to their own, I suppose. I only touch the fermented product myself.
This answer seemed to sit reasonably well with the groom's father, who, seeing a potential lucrative opportunity, suggested that, if there were time at the end of the festivities, we talk further on the matter.
I finished off my second glass and felt my stomach rumble in protest. Embarrassingly, anyone with sharp hearing in the room was now also aware of the growing civil unrest within my digestive system. The groom, exercising timely social tact, swiftly quelled any silent awkwardness by inquiring when I had last encountered a meal. He added that there were several tables laden with cuts of cold meat and a variety of pies and fancy pastries which had been laid out for discerning guests.
Without awaiting my reply, he pivoted to his father and inquired whether the patriarch desired a selection brought back from the buffet. No doubt knowing that the answer would be predictably in the affirmative, the groom suggested that I accompany him on his newly acquired errand. His father nodded, in what might be called a benevolent dismissal, friendly enough, though one sensed he was growing tired of our chatter and wished to get back to dominating his associates. So I and the groom set off through the crowd toward the aforementioned land of pie and venison. As soon as we were out of earshot of the group, the groom said in a low voice, "I apologize for father. He can become boringly competitive around strangers. I'm surprised he doesn't go the whole hog, flash his gums and urinate up the nearest chair leg, to be honest." We both laughed, for the image was almost too accurate. There was a thoughtful pause, then he continued, "Forgive me, but that's woodland breeze you wear, isn't it? I recognize it. I don't wear it myself, but I have friends who do." He flashed me a grin. "You have a remarkable nose for colognes," I said. "Yes, I do," he replied, in a way so matter-of-fact it oozed significance, adding with a smile, "Please, my friends call me Maximilian." And so we quickly dispensed with titles and surnames, as the newly introduced Andreas and Maximilian approached one of the tables. "So, the big day looms. I'm sure you both have a few butterflies," I asked ineptly, and instantly wished I had chosen better words. Maximilian turned to me and asked me the not unreasonable question under the circumstances, "Andreas, have you ever been married?" I trotted out my well-used reply to this particular unwelcome question. "Only to my poor family estate and the unfortunates who are unlucky enough to live there. I have just never found the time in the past, and am far too old for thoughts of romance these days." This strategy was usually sufficient for any perceptive individual to get the hint that this was the type of conversation I had little enthusiasm for. They could make up their own explanations for this. There'd be many to choose from. I presumed he had guessed correctly, as not one wrinkle of surprise flashed over his expression. In fact, his whole countenance suggested he now considered the subject to be entirely academic. He went silent, and his youthful expression of bonhomie disappeared. He absent-mindedly placed a few items from the table onto the empty plate he'd picked up. I was taken aback, but not entirely shocked by the sudden forlorn look on his face. "Not looking forward to the whole ghastly thing," I ventured in a lower voice. A flash of despair flickered in his eyes. "Don't misunderstand me. On the few occasions I've met her, she seemed perfectly nice, intelligent, eloquent, and well-educated. A real Fantasian rose. But, well, I take it young sir's inner beast is sent salivating at a medium-rare haunch of roast beef, not a tender chicken breast," I murmured, surveying the fare spread out before us. I fished slices of ham and venison onto my own plate with a silver fork, then targeted a dish bearing what smelled like small pork pies, topped with heart-shaped pastry crimping. Having carefully balanced 3 on top of the small mound of meat on my plate, I looked up. I could see the pup was almost in a panic. His eyes darted left and right, then lowered his head and rasped, "What am I to do, Andreas? The whole point of this damn affair is to provide the family with at least one bouncing grandchild." My mother is desperate to help recite nursery rhymes and make paw booties, but I don't think I'm capable of, well, rising to the task, so to speak. Are you a stranger to pleasures of the fur? I asked. His eye contact, sardonic expression, and tilted head told me otherwise. A good-looking beast like him was probably out backbiting on a regular basis, no doubt during those long rides in the woods he seemed so fond of. "Let me consider the situation," I said. "I may have an improvised solution to your dilemma." I took out my pocket watch and glanced at it. "It's almost 10:30. I think this party should start to disperse to the comfort of guest rooms and beds at around 11 of the clock. Meet me by the tapestries in the entrance hall at midnight. We can claim that our artistic interests compelled us to take the opportunity to examine the fine weaving, if any stragglers insist on joining in our conversation."
In my experience, there's nothing like the subject of needlework to bore overly chatty folk away. In the meantime, I think you should deliver an ample pile of food to your waiting father. I'm sure he is beginning to grow impatient. And I will fill this gaping void in my stomach." Maximilian looked at me uncertainly, then quickly glanced toward the far side of the room before gathering more items onto the plate.
I smiled and nodded as reassuringly as I could. "Go on. I'll see you later to admire the delicate needlework of those hunting scenes." He turned and made his way back through the guests. I then concentrated on the refined art of stuffing food down my throat as quickly as possible without letting crumbs or saliva fall onto the carpet. By the time I had finished off my second plate, the crowd was perceptibly thinning out. I could see my host and hostess at the far door, ushering out with smiles and sedate wags a slow but steady trickle of tired guests. Servants waiting to escort them to their bedrooms, order warm milk from the kitchens, hang up gowns, collect shoes and boots for cleaning, and take any new instructions for the morrow. My pocket watch showed I had just under an hour to locate my own servant, settle into my room, dismiss them for the evening, and prepare for my rendezvous at midnight.